Okay, so thank you for having me talk here this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're logging in from. So I'm going to talk to you about northern Mexico today, but most of my travel experience has actually been in South America, especially Chile. So I did a really quick 2-week trip to Mexico back in 2020. It was cut short by the pandemic. I was supposed to spend around 6 weeks there, so I'm going to go back there pretty soon to finish off what I started. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a little brief intro of myself. I've got a few slides talking a little bit about my history and stuff for people who don't know me. And I'm going to also talk to you a little bit about Australia briefly and some of the cool plants that we have there. And then I'm going to jump into the Mexico trip. So I'm going to talk about the ecology of the country, a bit about the climate, a bit about the geology, and obviously the cacti that I saw, which will be the main part of the presentation. And towards the end, I'm also going to touch on ecotourism and also conservation. So I am from the land down under, Australia, and we're known for having a bunch of crazy animals, heaps of dangerous insects, dangerous animals too. Anything from lizards to pythons, crocodiles, kangaroos. We've got some pretty interesting flora and fauna throughout the country. And I actually lived in Darwin, Australia, which is the most northern capital city, for a couple of years. And so this is a picture that I took on one of the cruises down one of the rivers there. So massive crocodiles. We've got some saltwater crocodiles along the beaches, but also some freshwater crocodiles on the inland rivers. So you definitely don't want to go swimming in any natural occurring water in the north there. And Australia is massive. It's a really big country. It's the same landmass basically as continental United States. It's just as wide. It's even taller. We've got a couple of islands as well, which is part of the Australian continent. So you can see it there in comparison to United States and Canada. But Australia, the topography of the country is actually pretty boring. So on this map here, you can see the green areas are, basically just 200 meters in elevation, and the brown areas are where we have our altitude. But Australia really doesn't have much altitude at all. It maxes out at about 7,000 meters, which is at the summit of our tallest mountain, and which is really nothing in comparison to what you've got in the USA. You got your highest mountains at around 20,000 feet, and in Chile it's 24,000 feet. So Australia really doesn't have mountains. And when the geologists came over from Europe, they just looked at the mountains and they're just like, this is just a bunch of rubble. So Australia is so old. It's 4.5 billion years old, and it used to be part of Gondwana, and it's traveled all across the globe. It's been up in the northern hemisphere, it's been in the southern hemisphere, and now it's on its way back north again. So very old country, very interesting geology too. And Australia is about 40% desert, in case you didn't know. So and only about 20% of the country you can grow crops on. So it's a very dry country, but especially in the north, there's some really interesting plants. So I actually lived up in Darwin. You can see they're right at the top, and spent some time living in Western Australia too. And yeah, there's some really interesting endemic species up there. But did you know that 75% of Australia's flora is made up of just 2 genera, eucalyptus trees and acacia? So it's not the most diverse country to go to if you want to see plants in habitat, although there is some really cool and interesting stuff. For example, up in the north, we've actually got a species of Baobab tree. So it's from the genus Adansonia. There's 9 species in the genus Adansonia. You've got 7 which are endemic to Madagascar, which are probably the most famous. You've got 1 to mainland Africa in Tanzania, I think, and then you've got 1 in Australia. So these are really impressive trees. You can drive around the country towns there and see these massive giant baobabs, which are really impressive, and they're really quite xeric as well. So as you can see, up on this volcanic rock here, we've got a couple of baobabs just hanging off the side of the cliffs. They've got a really massive cortex trunk. So it's really quite impressive to see where they can grow. And we've also got another type of bottle tree, It's in the Malvaceae family, same as the baobabs, but this is Brachychiton rupestris, known as the Queensland bottle tree. It's a really, really hardy ornamental. It's frost tolerant and grows in pretty much any area all across the country. And it's become really, really popular in cultivation over the years. And we've also got some interesting cycads, interesting palm trees as well. And also grass trees. I think there's around, off the top of my head, there's about 20 species of Xanathoria in Australia. So these are from Western Australia. They're very, very slow growing. These were probably about 300 or 400 years old. They grow incredibly slowly. And when we get the big bushfires coming through, it actually burns all of the dry foliage. So you end up with that really scorched black trunk, just pure carbon on the outside. So just a few of the really interesting plants are endemic to Australia. And as beautiful as Australia is, there's only one problem with it. No cacti. So cacti came to Australia sort of at the beginning of the 20th century, so about 1920, we started to get cacti coming into the country. So there's quite a lot of cacti in cultivation now, since we're such a globalized world. And my interest in cacti started in about the year 2000. So when I was about 10, my grandparents had a really massive landscape garden. My grandfather actually had an old tractor tire tipped over, and he went down to the local nursery and bought a bunch of cacti and put them in there. And they always really caught my attention, and I started my own little cacti collection at home. And of course, that leads to habitat. You know, you start thinking about habitat where these plants actually grow and live in nature. Oh, here's a couple of pictures of some old cacti gardens in Australia. So these are actually plants that were planted in around about 1930, 1940. So there's some really old cactus gardens in Australia. You can see some really big Echinopsis of Trichocereus species growing there. So we used to go around and see them when I was a kid, which was pretty fun. And here's a couple of cactus gardens of some friends who live up in New South Wales. So the climate's really fantastic in New South Wales and Australia. You can get away with growing just about anything you want outside in the garden. And here's a garden from down in Victoria, close to where I live. This is the South American section. They got some agave sprinkled in there too, but yeah, lots of Oreocereus do really, really well in Australia. And so when was it? I think 2015 was my first trip to Habitat. I went to the USA and saw the big saguaro cacti up there. But you know, I was always really, really interested in South American cacti, especially the columnar stuff. South America has got some incredible, incredible columnar cacti, really, really exotic species. There's a bunch of really cool stuff in Peru, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, but also in northeastern Brazil too, is a real hotspot for cactus diversity as well. And so the trips through South America led me to the city of Antofagasta. Here's where I was checking out Copiapoa atacamensis, but it turns out the cacti wasn't the only thing that caught my attention. So now I've actually got a Chilean partner and a Chilean son who's 3 years old. So we try and get into Habitat as much as we can and show the young guy around. And as some of you would know, I've started a tour and consulting company. So I do habitat tours, but also environmental consulting. So I've been doing that since 2019. So if you want to check me out at cactusexplorer.com, you can see some example tours there, but feel free to also send me an email at cactusexplorertours@gmail.com if you want any more info about that. Here's just a couple of quick shots of some of the tours that I've done over the last few years. The Atacama Desert in Chile is a really fascinating place. We've got some really great salt flats and lagoons as well. And if you're lucky, you can actually catch the flowering desert phenomenon too, which is really spectacular. And here's a shot. I've been doing some work with the agricultural department in Chile. So they're doing some really great seed banking projects here in northern Chile. So a lot of the flora is actually really highly endangered, and some species are rapidly heading to extinction, unfortunately. So they're really quickly going around and trying to conserve all those genetics in the form of seeds in their seed bank in Vicuña near La Serena. But I'm here to talk about Mexico as much as I'd like to talk about Chile. So Mexico has the highest diversity of cactus species in the world. I think that's pretty well known. There's around about 671 species of cacti that grow natively in Mexico, and 520 of them approximately are endemic to the country. So when you think about the cactus family, you've got about almost 2,000 species. So a quarter of them are actually endemic to the country of Mexico, which is pretty unreal. And cacti play a really important role in their habitats in terms of biodiversity, serving as food, shelter, habitat for many other life forms like birds, insects, reptiles, lichens, and even microbes. So, of course, you've taken some geology, geography classes in school, so you know where Mexico is. It's just located below the United States there, and it borders with Guatemala and Belize in the south. And here's a map showing the diversity or the global richness in cactus diversity. A really interesting study that came out in 2015. So you see up there in Mexico, there's a real hotspot, especially through the Sierra Madre Oriental, which is one of the major sierras in Mexico there. So it's a real hotspot, the hotspot for cactus diversity in the world. You see down there in South America and northeastern Brazil, you got another one down in Argentina there, where that reddy orangey color is too. Is another real hotspot for biodiversity. So why are so many species endemic to Mexico? Why is there such a high diversity of cacti? It's got to do with a couple of different factors. One of them is the climate. So you'll see on the map there, they've got about all the different climate types you can think of apart from ice caps and tundra. So very, very diverse climatically. And here's a map of Mexico's geology. So lots of different colors there. We've got a ton of different sedimentary rocks, igneous rocks, metamorphic rocks to a lesser extent. But exposed geology and climate are the two biggest drivers of plant physiology, anatomy, and speciation. So this combination of all those factors has led to an explosion of diversity in the cactus family in Mexico. So the area that I'm going to talk to you about is up in the north there, pretty close to the border with the States, actually. So I went to Coahuila and Nuevo Leon were the two main states that I checked out. I just did a couple of weeks whirlwind trip there. But there's such a high diversity of cactus species there. You can see many, many, many different species in just a day, not like in Chile where you can see about maybe 5 or 10 if you're lucky, and you have to drive another 100 miles north to see some more diversity. So across these two states, we've got different climates. We've got hot desert, semi-arid desert, and humid subtropical. So a real mix of different climates. So in the state of Coahuila, there are 230 native cactus species which grow in just that one state. It's the second state with the highest diversity in Mexico. I think the first one is San Luis Potosi, which is just a little bit further south, just under Nuevo Leon. And so in Coahuila, if you go to pretty much any of the mountains around the city of Saltillo, you can see this really nice Cactus pilosus, which comes from the Latin pilus, which means hair or trichome. So you see that out of the areoles there, they've not just got spines, but also stem trichomes coming out of there too. And there's a pretty high solar radiation in the area, so that can sort of help protect the cactus, give it a little bit more shade. So we were just at the start of the flowering season. I was there at the beginning of March. If I was to go back to Mexico again, I would recommend going in probably April or even May if you want to see the most flowers. I was right at the beginning, and yeah, I only managed to catch a few plants in flower. And this was a really, really massive example of this Pherocactus. I've never seen one quite so big. I've seen some other photos as well from other explorers, and I've got some really great shots of massive Pherocactus pilosa. It's a really, really nice plant, fantastic in landscaping because you've got those really nice new red spines that you can see all year round. So it makes for a really great landscape plant in the garden. Now, Lichtenbergia is kind of like a controversial genus. I think there's been some genetic research done, and they've actually put it in the genus Pherocactus. So I sort of thought I'd put it next to the first Pherocactus there, but it's got a really, really weird morphology, really, really long trichomes, not trichomes, tubercles. So you can see that kind of looks a little bit like the agaves. It's growing amongst Agave Lichtenbergia there, and it really blends in well into its habitat. The spines are really long and papery, so they kind of look like grass, and you can easily just walk right by them, not even see them, even though they can be reasonably large. So you can see that plant on the right there. It's actually got multiple shoots, and it's when the trichomes dry out, they fall off and kind of reveal this like cortex trunk. So this plant was massive, and I almost walked straight past it. They really just blend in so well into the xeric scrubland, into the shrubs, and into the agaves too. And there's me sitting behind it, and I couldn't believe how big it was. It's the biggest Lichtenbergia principius that I've ever seen. So really, really interesting plant. And I was showing some other friends in Mexico the photos later, and they said they've seen even bigger ones there too. So it was really cool to go back and check out some of those.
Quick question. So typically when, like, at least from my experience, from what I've seen and read, but like from you being directly there, these guys are going to clump once they reach a certain size, right? They're going to just start pupping and clumping rather than like becoming a huge solitary plant, right?
Yeah, that's how it seems. The biggest ones that I saw all had multiple shoots. So they're solitary when they're younger. But yeah, when they start getting a bit of size about them, when they start actually developing sort of an exposed cortex trunk, when some of those trichomes start dropping off, that's when they tend to shoot out. Yeah, directly from that.
Cool.
From that trunk. Yeah. Yeah. So really, really weird cactus. Next one is Turbine Valezianes. This was also near Saltillo. So in this part of Mexico, you got a lot of sedimentary rock. And so these are basically really old ocean floors that have just been pushed up over millennia. And so you got a lot of dolomite and limestone. So they tend to really love these carbonate soils. And so these little cacti are super, super cryptic. You can see on the left-hand photo there, you've got one that's just hiding underneath a rock there. You can see one here next to a 1 peso Mexican coin, which is about 1 inch in diameter. So you've actually got 4 tiny little plants there, and they're so cryptic. They blend in so well, and they just look like little pebbles. They've got a really, really nice kind of like magenta purple flower, but we didn't manage to catch any in bloom. It's a pretty tricky cactus to catch in flower. And you can see there, they've got those really interesting pectinate spines, they're called. So pectinate spines are when the spine's kind of like really fragile, and it kind of fans out, kind of like little feathers. And they're not dangerous at all, obviously, like many other cactus spines. So these ones are really only serving as shade or camouflage. So you can see that they kind of form like a little umbrella. So that's going to help shade the plant, protect it from any really harsh UV rays, so that could really dehydrate these tiny little plants quite quickly. So not only does it help to camouflage a plant, but it also helps to protect it from heat load, heat exhaustion, and UV damage. Next one's Phthalo Cactus bicolor. So there used to be a subspecies of this tricolor too, but they've put them all in the same species now. So there's a lot of variation between spines from population to population. The colors in the spines change a lot. And we've got a couple there with a little Lophophora underneath. It's Lophophora Williamsia, I'm pretty sure. And these were also just right around Saltillo. Pretty much go to there and walk up any kind of hill or mountain around the city, you're going to find a bunch of different cacti. And this was an interesting variation, same species, but just different phenotypes. It's just got some different characteristics, different coloration in the spines. Echinocactus platyacanthus, it's really, really common in Mexico. All throughout the Sierra Madre Oriental, you're going to find these big barrel cacti in a lot of different habitats. Really, really common, but they look very different from mature plants to juvenile plants. So on the right, we've got a really big mature plant. On the left, we've got a small juvenile plant. So they don't really, look too much alike, and you can easily mistake smaller plants as maybe a different species. They get these really nice purple tonations coming through there, the anthocyanins, no, betalain pigments, sorry. So yeah, they get those pigmentations coming through when they're younger, and they can get stressed and really show those really nice pigments. And yeah, they occur on just these small little hills just covered with dolomite and limestone. And when they occur, they usually occur in pretty large numbers. So you can see lots and lots of plants in the same habitat. And interestingly enough, I remember we were driving along and we saw these echinocactus on the hill. I'm like, yeah, we'll go up there and have a look. And we started walking around and we were pretty much stepping on Aricopus. So in this exact same habitat, it was just full of Aricopus. Really, really surprising. Was not expecting it, but yeah, they're surprisingly abundant Aricopus, but very, very cryptic. You can drive past many different localities and not even know they're there until you get out and start having a walk around. So the Aricopus we saw there was Aricopus Retusis, and yeah, just growing in amongst all of the echinocactus there. Lots and lots of sedimentary rocks, so they're really just really well adapted to those carbonate soils. Sometimes it's hard to know whether this is actually the same plant or whether it was actually like 3 seedlings which have germinated together. I've noticed that actually in Chile, sometimes you think that one plant's got a few different clusters, but after talking with people who have actually done lots more field work than me and have dug up holotypes and stuff like that, sometimes this can actually be 3 different plants that have just germinated together. Really, really big Aricopus there underneath an agave species. You can see next to my hand an Aricopus there for a bit of a size comparison. And some of them, when they're stressed, they can have this really nice kind of like turquoise or blue color to them. They really just camouflage in so well, just looking a lot like the color of the rocks that they grow amongst too. We've also got Aricopus fissuratus, variation Lloydius. This is a really attractive Aricopus species. They've got these really nice blistered tubercles, so kind of looks almost like lizard skin or crocodile skin. Also really, really well camouflaged. I think these might make their way up into the United States. Definitely the standard Aricopus fissuratus does, but I'm not sure if variation Lloydii does, but it's a really, really nice variation on the species. Now, this is a really tricky little Aricopus, Aricopus scaphirostris. It grows on these limestone hills where not much else grows. It looks like there's actually nothing at all growing on the hills until you start walking around and having a look, and it can be really quite difficult to pick out the plants or spot them in habitat. They've got a really beautiful like pinky or purpley flower too. So when they're flowering, obviously they're much more easy to find. But this is what you'll typically see when you go and kneel down on the ground there. So there's a bunch of limestone chips there, but you've also got the tubercles of about 3 different Aricopus there. I'll let you see if you can pick out a few of them. They're slightly greener.
What do you think the age on these plants are?
I don't know. I really don't know. They're not that big. They don't get as big as the Aricopus retusis or fissuratus. So I'm not sure whether that has any correlation to the size, but it's really xeric. Like they're just super extreme xerophiles. They're growing really, they're pretty much growing in like solid rock, you know, so they're just incredibly slow growing, and it can be just really difficult to estimate the age, you know. Don't know. Don't know.
What does the precipitation look like?
Sorry?
What does the precipitation look like in terms of...
Where this is, it's I couldn't tell you in inches. It's probably about 300 millimeters of rain a year. So it's not quite desert. The definition of a desert is like around 200, I think. So I think it's around about 3 to even maybe 4. So it gets quite a bit of rain, but the substrate is just so dry. You know, so when it does rain, it really doesn't retain much moisture at all. They've probably only got a few hours, the cacti, to absorb up as much water as they can, and then it's gone. You know, the reason they grow there is because the substrate doesn't allow other larger shrubs or trees to grow there, so a lot more light gets to the soil. So it's a good example of like habitat filtering and how the substrate can influence that. And this is another really good example too. So this is a cactus habitat, believe it or not. This place, this is a dry seasonal lagoon, and it was loaded with cacti, but you know, driving past you would just think there's nothing there. But you go and have a look in the cracks in this it's like a clay silt type soil. So you know, it's kind of got a lot of sedimentary deposits in it from the surrounding mountains that have kind of eroded away over the years. But you get down there and have a look, and you've actually got Aricopus Retusis growing in the dry lagoon. And there's a lot of plants. If you get the right habitat, they're really abundant. But I don't think it grows in like, what's the right way to put it? When they occur, there's a lot of them, but you have to get the right spot. And it's a really hot desert. So temperatures here, I couldn't even tell you in Fahrenheit, sorry, but they get to over 40 degrees Celsius, which is, it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, possibly even up to 110, 120. It gets really hot. And so these are geophytes. You know, they've got a underground taproot cortex storage organ. So that actually is a contractile taproot that actually sucks them down, draws them down underground. And that's where they keep all of their nutrients and water storage. So not a lot of surface area of the plant is actually exposed to sun and wind. So that helps to slow down dehydration by being a geophyte, practically like a bulb. And these are really beautiful cacti. They can actually get pretty big in cultivation. I was surprised, but in habitat, they're tiny. They're really quite small. Although if they can sort of colonize other kind of like mountainous areas where you get a little bit more precipitation and condensation, the plants can be bigger. But in this particular habitat, they're always pretty small, you know, maybe a couple of inches in diameter at the most. And even in these lagoons, you can see the Aricopus in the middle there, but you've also got the cryptobiotic crust actually forming around it there. So you can see that quite frequently through these dry lagoon habitats as well. It seems to be a really good habitat situation for those types of organisms as well.
It's like so crazy to think about anything germinating there. Like it literally is a seed getting stuck in a crack. Like it's nuts.
I think, yeah. I mean, they get monsoonal rains at the end of summer. They get monsoonal rains that come through, and the area gets soaked, you know, and it can even have a couple of inches of rain in that lagoon. But it doesn't last long, you know, so the plants have got to be quick when they germinate. And yeah, well, in the cracks, you know, they probably essentially grow underground for several years, you know, maybe even up to 5 or 10 years. I wouldn't be surprised if they're more or less only just getting a little bit of sunlight that's kind of like refracting through the, you know, through the clay, you know. I don't know how else they would be able to establish.
It's so wild because like with other sort of mediums and substrates, like even if it like lacks organic matter, there's still like ways for seeds to get caught in different places and be like covered. But with something like that's organic rich, but like so compact and like not yielding to even your foot when you step on it, it just like blows my mind that like a seedling could grow from that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've actually got bacteria as well, which colonize the roots, and that actually helps them
Yeah.
nitrogen from the atmosphere, which is really abundant. So they've sort of got little ways which they exploit, and they have
Methods.
symbioses as well. So that's kind of really interesting. But this clay soil is actually really quite mineral rich. There's a lot of different carbonates in there because there's a ton of dolomite limestone, which is full of calcium, magnesium, and that all sort of drains down to this whole system too. So they're picking up nutrients from multiple different places. But well, yeah, so this is Mammalaria coalensis, which also grows in these seasonal lagoons as well.
So if there's seasonal ephemeral lagoons, does that mean these get temporarily submerged?
Yeah, but for a short period of time. So it might only be for a few days because the water does quickly absorb into the ground. So, but yeah, definitely they can be completely covered with water, maybe even an inch or two of water, but for a short period of time. And yeah, in the same habitat again, you've got Mammalaria hyderi. So they grow as a geophyte as well, but they also grow in the mountains too. So they got the ability to colonize different types of habitats. And this is a picture from online from Cactus Art. So you can see like that really, it almost forms like a cortex underground before the root system. So it's kind of like a semi-taproot. So that's what the plant actually looks like. So you can imagine that just completely retracted down, almost submerged there in that clay soil. And yeah, like if you go up into the mountains, you can see lots of different hectare bromeliads. You've got Selaginella species, all types of different cacti, and you can see the Mammalaria hyderi growing there too. It's got a really massive distribution through Mexico and also into the United States. And this is a really, really nice Mamalaria. I got to admit, I'm not like a huge fan of Mammalaria, but this one really got my attention. It's actually got a pseudocephalium. So conchocephala is from Greek, and it literally means snowy head or snowy cap. So where the active areoles, which are actually producing flowers, have also got a lot of trichomes around them too. So these are the ones that are producing the flowers. So it's kind of got like a halo. They stick out really easily in habitat. If you're in the right area, you can spot them pretty quickly. Really, really nice Mammalaria species. Another Mammalaria which really caught my attention there is Mammalaria Lenta. So yeah, I just found it really beautiful. It's got really short spines, really delicate spines, but they can form pretty big groups and clusters of even probably close to 100 heads on some of them. So yeah, really, really spectacular. Didn't catch this one in flower. Doesn't have really beautiful flowers like a lot of Mammalaria, just tiny little white things. But the plant, the morphology of the plant is really quite beautiful. So here it is growing amongst pretty much pure dolomite. Really well camouflaged too. Actually, you can quite easily walk past them in habitat and not spot them. They just blend in so well. And this is growing in a limestone shelf, so pretty much just pure limestone. Nothing else growing here. Not a lot of organic matter. So they're relying on that symbiotic relationship with the mycorrhiza, the bacteria, to help them kind of break down that rock, fix nitrogen, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty much how they get away with surviving in these kind of locations. Lophophora williamsii got a pretty big distribution through Coahuila. It might even make its way down into San Luis Potosi, but that's where you sort of get diffuser and that. But yeah, it also actually grows in those seasonal lagoons that I was talking about before. There's quite a lot of different cacti species which have evolved to tolerate those kind of really dry habitats. So you can see it here growing as a geophyte, but you can also go up into the mountains and see it up there too, and they're much more hydrated. We've got some more photos of them in a sec. But yeah, really spectacular. Pretty amazing to see Lophophora growing in those kind of lagoons. And you can see the picture on the top left there. You can see how it's really retracted down. You can see how much bigger it would be after it rained, you know. So they change in size really quite a lot. They can sort of shrink down, you know, quarter of an inch, half an inch in the dry season. Same species. This is when you go up into the mountains, they're much more hydrated. You know, these photos were taken only a couple of days apart. So the ones in the exposed lagoon where it gets really hot, a lot of solar radiation, are really dry, retracted down. But the ones up in the mountains are kind of much more plump. Although they're still pretty stressed, you can see sort of like those betalain pigments coming through. You got that little purple tonation there. But every plant is just so unique. You know, I mean, it's the same in cultivation with Lophophoras too, but in habitat, it's really obvious. You know, everyone's got its own little character. Yeah, really, really cool plants. And they're pretty abundant. You know, if you get into the right area, you can see a lot. Lophophora fricki has got a more of a restricted distribution around the area of Viesca, so kind of near Torreon. I didn't see any of these kind of growing in lagoons. They were mostly up in the mountains. You have to sort of go trekking a bit to see them. But yeah, extremely xerophytic plants. Any kind of little rocky fissure or crevice that's got just enough space for it to germinate in it, they'll grow in them. So they're extreme xerophile. Picture on the right, could be one plant, could be multiple plants, but it was growing almost on a vertical ledge. And you see that cyanobacteria, that cryptobiotic crust, is kind of holding all that silt in place. And so, yeah, it's sort of really relying on that, you know, growing sympatrically with that cryptobiotic crust to actually help to hold the whole thing together. Escobaria tuberculosa, I think. I thought it might have been Lloydii. I was kind of confused. They look pretty similar. The flowers kind of helped to tell them apart, so there wasn't flowers. So I think it's tuberculosa. Pretty common. Saw it in a lot of limestone habitats, co-inhabiting with a lot of different other cacti. Even the Lophophora, the one on the right's got a little Lophophora, which is actually germinated just underneath it. Here you got a really nice limestone terrace. You got the Escobaria, you got the Echinocerius, you got Ocotillo behind it, Jatropha, Opuntia. A lot of different xeric stuff going on there, all sympatrically growing together. And they're all doing the same sort of thing. Like cacti are not unique in that symbiotic relationship with bacteria and mycorrhiza, which help them colonize these kind of xeric places, you know. Ocotillos have got the same thing going on. The Jatropha's got the same thing going on too. Epithelantha. This is Gregii. More common than I thought. I thought I was going to have trouble finding Epithelantha. But yeah, pretty much you walk up any kind of hill, any kind of mountain in Mexico, you're going to see a bunch of diversity of cacti. They got a really weird fruit. So the picture on the right, it's not a bud, it's actually a fruit, which is just emerging through those spines there. This plant's probably been damaged by frost. They get pretty hard frosts in this area in Colwilla, so you can get temperatures down to like -10 degrees Celsius. Don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, sorry, but pretty hard frost, pretty cold. So some plants can get frost damage, but we know that cacti are pretty resilient. So you can see this one's reshooting with lots of different shoots there. This one's a bit more hydrated. You can start to see the epidermis and the cortex of the plant there, but most of the time when they're dehydrated, they're completely closed and not much sunlight's actually getting through. So it's pretty hard to see the green epidermis. And they're really cryptic in habitat too. So here you can see sort of a shot from a bit further back. You got the Epiphelantha in the foreground there, but they just blend in so well to the habitat, just looking like little stones. This was more tricky, Epiphelantha boki or bokii, however you want to say it. Tiny, really, really tiny. Did not see a very big individual of this at all. Usually around about 1 inch in diameter. And when they're dehydrated, like in these pictures, they're completely closed, just covered in spines. When they're hydrated, you can start to see a little bit of that epidermis, but they're pretty much just white in habitat and small, so very, very difficult to see. The two little plants on the left there are probably about a 1/4 inch a piece across. They're really, really small. And you got to be in the right area to see these. They're not as common as some of the other species. This is Sclera Cactus. I got to admit, when I saw this, I had no idea what it was. Was not familiar with this genus at all. I think the biodiversity hotspot is actually up in the United States, but you got a few species like this which make their way down into Mexico. And so really beautiful crimson flowers on this guy. I really, really like the flowers.
These things look crazy in habitat. Like,
yeah, they're pretty, yeah.
So insane. Like the spines are like the length of like spaghetti. You know, like looks like a pineapple covered in spaghetti spines.
Yeah, and they've got this like hook on the end of them too, so
yeah,
you can get caught up in them pretty easy as well. But they're really well camouflaged, you know, with those long spines too. They just kind of look like a little cluster of grass or something like that. So really, really well camouflaged in habitat as well. Yeah, the Queen Victoria agave. So this is a pretty sad story, I think, really, with this agave. You know, it's quite endangered, very endangered in habitat. They call it Noah in Mexico. And near Saltillo, there was a little mountain called Las Noas, which means the Noahs. You know, that was essentially where it was discovered from. And now you go that you cannot see a single one. They've all been taken. Obviously, they've got a really high ornamental value. And so not just collectors, but anyone really who likes to have garden plants at home, which is a lot of people in Mexico too, found this plant really attractive and took it from habitat. So it's pretty tricky to find. You have to be in the right spot to see it. Not that common, but very, very nice agave. Another nice agave was Nicholsii. It's got a really nice black terminal spine on the end of the leaf there. So yeah, it's also got some really nice white streaks on the leaves as well. So I thought it was a really nice ornamental agave too. I never actually heard of it before. We kind of accidentally came across it, didn't know what it was. Talked to Hidden Agave, Jeremy Spath. He helped us out with the ID. Beautiful, beautiful agave. I'm surprised it's not more common in cultivation, actually. Now I'm going to talk about Astrophytum a little bit. So this is Astrophytum coahuilensis, endemic to Coahuila. Not that common, had a bit of trouble finding it. Looks a lot like Astrophytum myriostigma, but that actually grows several hundred miles away down in San Luis Potosi. You pretty much can't tell them apart unless they've got flowers. The flowers in coahuilensis have this kind of nice orange, red streaks through them. Whereas the flower on myriostigma is pretty much just pure yellow. And that's more or less the only difference that I could tell you, but really, really, really tricky convergence there, but different species. There you got it hanging off a bit of limestone. Really xeric species too. Really only saw it growing in these types of situations. And there's one growing next to a little Lophophora fricki. So there's a bit of a hint. Lophophora fricki is not that common. So if you go looking around that habitat, you can see them. Astrophytum Capricorn. This was more common. Saw it in a few different habitats actually. Just a little bit too early. So many plants had buds, but I was just a few weeks too early, probably a month too early, you know. But yeah, these have got a really nice flower. Really big old one there on the right. You've got a little small one there on the left. And it's pretty common to see them germinating with this Selaginella. So you go in like a rocky crevice to that Selaginella. It's kind of like a moss. It's a really nice habitat, a really nice substrate, you know, for a seedling to germinate in. And so it's sort of protected there, helps to retain a bit of moisture. So that's pretty important when they're starting to establish themselves. So interesting kind of not symbiosis, but a sympatric relationship that's beneficial to the cactus. Now we crossed from Saltillo, Monterey, went down the other side of the Sierra Madre Oriental. The climate changed, much more oceanic influence coming across from the Gulf of Mexico. And so this habitat was much more humid, a lot more vegetation. And here we spent, I don't know, I think it was pretty much 2 full days looking for Astrophytum caput medusae. So gets its name from Medusa. It looks like the head of Medusa with the snakes, you know. This cactus, it's probably, I don't know, it's got to be, I think, the most endangered cactus in Mexico. Multiple different reasons. It was poached to hell when it was first discovered. Not going to name the European country that was responsible for a mass poaching, but there were people with bags full of these things. And in habitat, they can get really big. They can form a massive cortex, you know. And so really, really attractive old plants gone. Just sweeps, you know, lines of like 8 people walking across the habitat, just digging up everyone they could. The other thing that really threatens it is overgrazing by cattle. So where we did manage to find this was actually in the middle of a ranch. And so obviously, you know, they've basically got no spines, or no defensive spines at least, and nothing to protect them. The cattle just, you know, hush. It's like caramel for the cattle, you know, that little juicy succulent snack there. So yeah, this thing is destined for extinction unless something changes there. And the other interesting thing is they've got dimorphic areoles, which means the areole is actually split into 2 parts. So the spiniferous part where the spines come out of is separate from the floriferous part that produces the flowers. So about 85% of all cacti are monomorphic or have monomorphic areoles. So it means that the trichomes, the stems, the branches, everything happens in the same location. The other 15% have the dimorphic areoles. So the Lichtenbergia principis is a good example of that. A lot of Mammalaria species, Coryphantha, they're good examples of that too, but not a lot of other cacti. Mostly Mexican cacti, interestingly, have that kind of morphology. That's a typical habitat where you got to look for this thing. So it's kind of like, yeah, subtropical, scleriferous forest, difficult habitat, really, really difficult habitat to get around in and try and find these things. Also in the same area, you can get this little Mamalaria Spherica. Kind of looks like Mammalaria longimama, but this is kind of etiolated. It's been growing underneath some shrubs, so it's kind of exaggerated in its form. If you get it in cultivation, it's kind of much more compact. Nice little Mammalaria, yellow flowers. Same habitat again. We saw this Jatropha. I think it's Jatropha cathartica. You see on the image on the left, it's got a really big cortex. Had some nice shoots coming out, even had a little fruit on it. Classic of the Euphorbiaceae. It's in the Euphorbia family. That fruit's really, really common characteristic. Sometimes a better determinant of what family it belongs to than looking at flowers, for example. The Aztecians, and this is my favorite. Now, these are my favorite cacti in Mexico. There's only 3 species that we know of: Aztecium ritterii, or valdesi, and hintonii. So 3 species. Obviously pretty difficult to find in habitat. The first one was discovered in 1929 by Frederick Ritter. He was a really famous cactus explorer, did a heap of really cool work in South America, but in his first trips, he actually went to Mexico. He was a geologist. And so, you know, geologists are interested in all kinds of weird, interesting rocks and minerals, and one of them being gypsum. So it was thanks to his geological interest, basically, that he found and discovered Aztecium ritterii. And it wasn't until like 1990s that who was it? George Hinton, the British explorer, found Aztecium hintonii, and then it wasn't until 2010 or 2013 or something like that, when Astrophytum Valezianes was discovered. So it was only 10 years ago, not even. So could be more, who knows? But really, really fascinating little cacti. They're gypsophiles, so they love growing on gypsum. So you can see in this image here, gypsums, it's not really a rock. Depends how specific you want to get on the definition of what a rock is, but it's more of an evaporate mineral. But it can crystallize and form crystals. So you can see those little crystals in this image here forming around this little Astrophytum. And interestingly, there's been a study done into calcium oxalate crystal formation in cacti. Not just, and this doesn't just happen in cacti, it happens in a lot of different plants, but it's a way that cacti actually manage the high density of calcium, which occurs in gypsum. Gypsum's actually a really toxic soil. It's full of calcium sulfate, calcium and sulfate, so that just really toxic in high quantities. So these crystals actually form right near the epidermis in the hypodermis, so just underneath the epidermis, in between that and the cortex. So you can see they form these really nice, prisms. The study is really interesting. If you want to have a look at it, I can send you the link later, because the crystals take different forms in different types of cacti. It's incredible. But basically, it's a way to help sort of manage the toxins, essentially. So the plants just condense them. They can do that. Like this is, okay, so this is a typical plant cell. So in plant and eukaryotic cells, like animal cells too, we've all got these things called vacuoles, and they actually store toxins. So in human cells, we've got multiple little vacuoles. In plant cells, there's just one big vacuole. And so what happens is they actually put all of that calcium in there, and it forms in a calcium oxalate, and that can actually take up the space of an entire cell. But that's one option. And the other option is that the cactus can actually have specialized cells called crystal idoblasts. So these are actually excretory cells. So a cactus can't actually really necessarily excrete something from its body through the epidermis. So it has to do it internally. And so basically it just stores all of this into these idoblasts, and that helps to regulate the calcium, silicates, carbonates in its tissues. So not only does it serve that function, but it also doubles as an anti-herbivory technique. So you've got an animal or even an insect, a grub, going to bite into that, and it's got this toxic crystal there, or it's going to be crunchy, it's not so nice to eat. So these two images are actually not from cacti at all, they're from other herbaceous plants. So multiple plants have employed this tactic. And so you can see these ones are actually called raphides. So, the idoblast cell has been so full, especially on this image on the left, so full of toxins, so full of the calcium, it's actually exploded and shot out this needle-like structure. And so you can see in the image on the right there too, how it actually looks in the plant tissue there. So interesting. Here we've got Astrophytum hintonii. You can see the gypsum crystals forming on the image on the left there too. You can see it's pretty much just pure gypsum, this wall. So multiple strategies. They're storing that excess calcium in those cells, but they're also got the symbiosis with mycorrhiza and bacteria helping them to actually get some nitrogen and stuff from the atmosphere. So you can see it's pretty much the only cactus or only plant, more or less, growing in this habitat. You get some Hectea species, some Agave species, but they've all got the same physiological adaptations going on. So they're able to colonize these types of, difficult habitats, really, really difficult habitats. And Astrophytum hintonii, it doesn't just appear in one or two plants. When you find the right spot, there's a lot, and it's really impressive to see them in habitat. But it's a very, very niche habitat that only grow on vertical walls. So you go a little bit higher up in the mountain, or you go in the flatter areas, nothing. It's only on those vertical walls. Another good example of habitat filtering. And here you got the Astrophytum growing with Hectea and Agave as well. And this is the classic flower of hintonii. kind of similar to the other Azteciums, similar color at least, but a little bit different morphology in the other species. Oh yeah, so when George Hinton found the Azteciums, boy did he strike big. He didn't just find another Aztecium species, he found Geohintonia mexicana, which grow sympatrically in the same habitat as Hintonii. So you can see this Geohintonia on the left, there's one on the right growing just above a little Aztecium there. These were difficult. They're definitely not as common as the Azteciums. They're really rare. And unfortunately, there was a ton of holes in this place. We went to a known locality. A lot of the Azteciums are pretty difficult to get to because, well, vertical wall. I mean, you need to bring a ladder to get up there, you know. But in the places where you could reach, there was a lot of holes. You could see it was a poacher's paradise. So yeah, we didn't find many Geohintonia, only had a short time in the habitat too, but that's pretty much what they look like. Here's a little comparison between the two. You know, if you're just being introduced to these cacti, they can kind of look a little bit the same. So Aztecium Hintonia on the left there, Geohintonia mexicana on the right. One of the main differences on the Aztecium, as you can see, they've actually got these transverse furrows going across the ribs of the cactus there. The Geohintonia doesn't have that. The spines are also a little bit different. If you can call them spines, they're kind of like just paper, you know. They don't have a lot of predation from larger herbivores because they're growing on these vertical walls, can't reach them. So why have defensive spines, I guess? Yeah, so these are growing in the Sierra Madre Oriental. It's full of all kinds of different carbonate rocks, dolomite, limestone, gypsum. This is just pure gypsum here. You've also got yucca, kind of rosana growing there, full of selaginella, full of conifers, really interesting endemic conifers in the area too. Palm trees as well, Sabal mexicana, Brahia decumbens, a couple of really interesting palms. Fascinating habitat, such diversity of many different plant families in the same place, which have all evolved to tolerate highly toxic, difficult soils, basically. So really, really interesting physiological convergence, essentially, between different plant families. There's a close-up of the Selaginella, Gypsophila. You got to sort of be there at the right time to catch them open like that. In other habitats, they were closed. They call them the resurrection plant. They look dead when they're dormant, but then they come back to life pretty quickly within like 24 hours after the rain, and look like this one here. Kind of serious. I'm not going to go into species here, just a really general overview of the genus. Really common in Mexico, up in the United States too. They just grow in all kinds of different habitats, hot deserts to subtropical climates. Really nice flowers. They really go off when they flower, look like a bunch of fireworks. Spot them from a mile away. You got it growing with the Agave Lechuguilla. If I had at least a favorite agave, it would be this one. It was kind of like the bane of the existence of the trip. I got a lot of spines in my butt, a lot of spines in my shins.
Shin daggers. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's no polite way to say it. These things are absolute bastards. I don't like them. Important for the ecology, though, I should say. They're really important for the environment. So we'll leave them alone.
It's crazy too, because like throughout Mexico into Texas, it's like ground cover almost.
Yeah. Yeah. They go up into Texas too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing, like Opuntia echinocerius, Agave lechuguilla, and then like, it's rough.
Yeah. They're so common. You know, they've been really successful. They're really successful species, but yeah, they can make habitats kind of difficult to get around in. There's one growing. The plant on the left there that's dormant is the Jatropha. I can't remember the species, but it's an interesting Jatropha that grows in the habitat too. Oh yeah, this was an interesting series. This sort of really caught my attention. Doesn't look much like a lot of the other species. It's a small little globular, almost geophytic type cactus. And it was just growing in the weirdest habitat. It was kind of near Monterey. It was in like a subtropical coniferous forest. I got in contact with a guy who lives close to there, and he's like, right, I can show you this cactus, because I don't think I would have found it in the short time frame that I had alone. So he took me here, and I'm like, we're driving in this forest. I'm like, dude, are you sure that this cactus grows here? He's like, yeah. So we're walking around, and in the pine needles, here they are. And it's kind of weirded out by it. I never really saw anything quite like it. Oh, my memory card on my camera. Well, I didn't have a memory card in my good camera, so I just have iPhone photos of this one. But yeah, there it is, growing in the pine needles. Just bizarre. Yeah, there was other cacti growing here too, Echinocereus and the Mammalaria glaciae as well was growing in the same habitat, but it was a little bit more kind of like xerophytic. You had to go in a bit more rocky terrain in the same area to actually find it. But that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of what the habitat looks like. It's very humid, there's a lot of large conifers there, yuccas, lots of ground cover, lots of moss, really, really humid habitat. And there's little Mammalaria pretty much just covered by the pine needles. I don't know how they do it. I didn't think that they would like so much they obviously like a lot of organic matter. And this one was hanging off the side of a rock growing in moss. First time I had seen that. Oh, well, I'd sort of seen similar stuff with the Selaginella, but not quite like this. Okay, wrapping it up now. I thought I will just include one Opuntia in this talk. I'm sorry for the Opuntia fans out there, but yeah, Opuntia rufida was quite nice. I found it quite attractive. When it gets stressed, gets a lot of betalain pigments coming to the surface, you can get plants that almost look purple. I thought it was quite attractive. Thought it was quite a nice cactus. This one's really hydrated, healthy, not very stressed at all, so it doesn't have those color tones to it. But yeah, the flowers, I thought it was pretty nice. It'd be pretty nice in landscape gardens if you keep it under control. Yeah, well, that wraps up the main part of the talk. I'm going to talk briefly about conservation now. Look, cacti and succulents, they're endangered in habitat, a lot of them, and a lot of them are getting more endangered from multiple different sources: expansion of civilization, climate change, which is pretty much the same thing, mining operations, unsustainable agricultural practices. Look, a lot of that stuff, to be honest, I don't know. It's pretty overwhelming. It's pretty far out of our control. But something that we can have immediate influence on is the poaching and demand from the horticultural trade from cacti, from habitat. So, gone into this on social media a lot. It's sort of just a distasteful topic, really. It's something that people don't really like to hear a lot of the time, but it's something that we do need to sort of talk about. But basically, if you want to read it in detail, go on to ethicalcactus.com. That's a total work in progress. We don't have much free time, so it's pretty much just got that one poster on it. But there you can find that information, have a thorough read of it if you like. Something we can also do in terms of conservation is seed banking. This can happen even on a societal level scale, cactus societies, but Chile's got a really big seed bank. It's funded by the Millennium Seed Bank project from Kew Botanical Gardens in England. They constructed this facility. It's bomb-proof, flood-proof, fire-proof, It's a pretty interesting place to visit. And so, yeah, they've been going around in northern Chile, collecting all of the seeds of different species, mostly endangered and vulnerable species. And they keep them in a freezer of negative 20 degrees Celsius. Don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, sorry, but it's cold. We were in there for about 5 minutes and it was enough. But interesting place to visit. They dry the seeds out in silica gel. They put them in aluminium bags with practically no oxygen. They put them in a freezer of like negative 10 to kind of slow the metabolism down, and then they put them into the negative 20. and that slows the metabolism of the seed right down. It's dry, it's cold, doesn't have much oxygen or any oxygen at all getting to it practically. And they can last for up to 50 years or more, maybe more depending on the species. You know, apparently it could even get up to 80 or 100. So they're sort of just testing that out now. So we'll kind of be old people by the time we find out how viable the seeds are by then. But they sort of do them gradually, you know, every few years they go out and collect different batches of seeds, you know. They've got a lot of different cacti there, agricultural seeds. Oh yeah, here's some more of the infographics. You can go on there and have a look at them if you want to see that stuff in more detail and have a read of it. But just basically goes into the problem, the issue, and what are some of the things that we can do about it from a cultivation perspective. Oh yeah, and we've gone ahead and translated some of these in a different language. Not everyone speaks English, you know, which we thought when we were kids, I guess. So you have to communicate this language to other groups, ethnic groups of people as well. Again, if you want to check out my website, if you want to get in contact with me, just email me at Cactus Explorer Tours. Check out the website if you want. Hopefully this year, at the end of the year, we'll be able to do some international type tourism. Last year was a bit of a can. Just ended up doing some local tourism with Chilean people, which was actually surprisingly good. But yeah, it would be great to get some international folks over to Chile again. I specialize in tours in Chile, but I can also do bits of Peru and Argentina as well. Oh yeah, if you want to go to Fine Art America, I'm selling some artwork there too. But if you want photos, if you want to print a photo, you can get in contact with me too, and I can send you a photo or something like that. We can work out a price. I don't ask much for them if you want to print out some artwork. Salud. Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. That was great.